Hi, I'm Allison Frazier. I'm joining you today from Massachusetts and the land of the Wampanoag people. I encourage you to learn about the original stewards of the land where you live. Welcome to the overview of advancing prenatal through 3 conversations, building relationships, and having productive conversations with decision makers. Voices for Healthy Kids, an initiative of the American Heart Association, works to advance equitable policies that make the places where babies, toddlers, kids, and families live, learn, and play healthier. I am a National Senior Director of Voices for Healthy Kids, working on communications and campaign planning. I value loyalty, and doing this work, I feel thankful. I'd like to introduce you to a newish member of the Voices for Healthy Kids staff, Joshua Harris, who will support the technical assistance in this project. Joshua.
Hello, everyone. I'm Joshua Harris, Senior Manager of Marketing and Communications for Voices for Healthy Kids, and I value partnership. In doing this work, I'm excited for continued partnership so that we can work to pass effective policy solutions.
Great. I'd also like you to meet 2 of the team members who have collaborated with Voices for Healthy Kids on this project and will be presenting with us today, Jennifer Messenger and Anusuya Starbear.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jennifer Messenger from Metropolitan Group. I value passion, and doing this work, I feel energetic for the change coming and also the energy that comes up in all of you when we're doing this work.
And I'm Anusuya Starbear. I've been passionate about the power of clear and compassionate communication, I think, for my whole life. And for several decades now, I've worked with individuals, families, groups, and organizations who want to learn how to talk about challenging things with another person while maintaining and even deepening the feelings of trust and safety in the relationship. I value contribution. And doing this work, I feel thankful for all of you and excited about what this guide can do to support you in your important work. We just introduced ourselves in a specific way, touching on our values and feelings about this work. And this is a preview of what we'll share today. I encourage you to pause here and think about your own values and how this work of talking with decision makers makes you feel. You can leave this slide up while you pause to give you some words to consider.
In the next half hour, we'll take you through a brief introduction to a new resource, a guide and training to support advocates working on prenatal through 3 policies. This work came specifically out of requests from advocates in our network. They wanted help customizing messages and policy asks, especially when working with decision makers in conservative states. We'll share our research, our messages, and our audience strategy. We're offering something else too that I'm hearing is pretty unique and urgently needed. Support for advocates to find common ground with decision makers who hold differing views and to engage in those conversations in a non-polarizing and psychologically safe way. You'll hear more about this shortly, but Anusuya, in her own words, says, this is about being smart in our strategy and smart in how we maintain our passion for this work and our compassion for everybody's basic humanity. It's about doing our best work while still taking care of ourselves. In this current polarized and polarizing political atmosphere, it's easy to feel depleted or turn against one another or feel hopeless. We need to take good care of ourselves and our colleagues in order to prevent burnout and isolation. Now, I've worked with some of you for years and some of you for a short time, and I suspect most of you are nodding. We see you. We see the power and the weight of the work you do. We hope this new resource is helpful to you. In addition to this brief overview, here's a full set of resources available to you, and we'll show the links to all of this at the end, which it probably, since this is recording, it'd be a good idea to take a picture of that so you can access to them. But the online guide has detailed content and exercises on everything we'll discuss today and more. You can take the full training. You can join a community of practice with others doing this work. And the Voices for Healthy Kids staff can provide free technical assistance for when you need help. Our work is only beginning. As capacity and funding allows, we'll add to the library of offerings. Projects are chosen based on real-world requests from advocates. So please dive in. If there's something else that we can help you with, please ask. We're looking forward to your feedback on this guide. And then I turn it to Jennifer.
Thanks, Allison. This research and resource that we're offering you focuses specifically on conversations with decision makers in conservative states. That's where we heard that advocates were feeling the most opposition to prenatal through 3 policies. Eventually, we hope to expand this research to strengthen conversations with all decision makers across the political spectrum. Our first goal was to more deeply understand this group of decision makers, and specifically the values and needs that inform their policy work. There's no one conservative decision maker. That's a huge group of people. So we developed and built out 4 archetypes. And by that, I mean specific, typical examples of a person or a group. And those archetypes let us go through smaller doorways, if you will, to understand conservative decision makers around prenatal through 3 policy. You're seeing the archetypes on the slide. I'll tell you more in a second, but before I go there, let me tell you a little bit about how we got here. And there's more methodology detailed in the guide if you're interested. We started with some existing research on decision maker archetypes across the political spectrum, and we narrowed in on the conservative archetypes. We workshopped those with key influencers representing both conservative and progressive viewpoints and party affiliations, and with advocates working on prenatal through 3 issues in conservative states. So that's where we landed: church and country, economic influenced, legacy Republican, and populist aligned. And in just a few minutes, I'm going to tell you more about each of those. We then identified decision makers and policy influencers who fall within each of those archetypes based on the descriptions we created and informed by suggestions from those interviewees and the advocates. So decision makers didn't raise their hand and say, I belong in the church and country archetype. We looked at the kind of work they were doing, the kinds of statements they were making, what advocates shared about them, and assigned them to where we thought they fit the best. And then we interviewed them. We interviewed 17 people altogether across the different archetypes. We also looked at social media posts made by decision makers within each archetype. Our commitment is to do this work without stereotype or judgment. So this isn't about putting people in one basket. It's not about generalizing. It's about really understanding as deeply as we can the feelings, needs, and core values within each archetype to help you advance productive debate. Let me tell you a little bit more about each archetype. The church and country archetype were defined as folks who are pretty loyal to very loyal to their chosen leaders. So other people in their party, leaders of their church, leaders of their social community. They're deeply influenced by a conservative interpretation of Christian values and a moral approach. We heard a lot about how they're called by their faith to help others and to be a protector of their constituents and community. Often they believe churches and communities already have sufficient resources to help people. And we'll talk more about what do we do with that from a policy perspective a little later when we're talking about messages. They tend to take pride in the position that they've earned. And side by side with that, they sometimes have an expectation that others should work hard for what they desire in life. That's a real sense of individualism. At the same time, in our interviews, we heard sympathy for people living in poverty, especially in rural areas. The values that we experienced in this archetype were authority, tradition, control, and care. The economic influenced archetype is highly educated and financially secure. Keep in mind, I'm talking here about elected officials, not voters, not members of the general public, elected officials. So elected officials who we would categorize in the economic influenced archetype, highly educated and financially secure. They're the ones who prioritize the economy and business strength. So every time you talk to them, you know you're walking in needing to talk about finances and ROI. They tend to favor limited government. They're passionate about discussing the details of a policy. One thing we heard in talking to advocates were, these are the folks who I can really dig into on data and numbers and costs and benefits and return on investment and how a policy works. This group, as I said, favors limited government, really believing that the public sector alone is inefficient and ineffective for solving problems. So talking about how things happen across sectors and the role of all sectors and people to solve problems is important. The values we observed in this archetype were freedom, individual choice, and control. And along those lines, the family unit and freedom of the family unit is essential. It can be really helpful to show how proposed solutions remove barriers for families to maximize their own personal choice. That's a really good bridge between collective policy systemic action and personal action and accountability. Legacy Republicans are decision makers that are driven by traditional values. And by that, I mean hard work and the American dream. That represents the legacy Republican archetype. Some people talked about this as old school Republicans, McCain Republicans, if you will. They value debate. They're most open to other points of view. They're sometimes open to stepping outside of party lines. They tend to be really passionate about policy details. Like these are, again, the ones who are going to dig in with you on policy details. They value diligence, care, service, and leadership. The populist aligned archetype are decision makers who value individuals making efforts to advance themselves without outside help or government spending. They're led by constitutional ideals. Really important note here, I just stressed a minute ago that we're talking about elected officials and decision makers across these archetypes, not the general public. So in this one, instead of calling this the populist archetype, we're calling it populist aligned. And this is an important distinction because populists tend to be working class, often have lower levels of academic completion. In contrast, the elected officials who represent that group are often people who make a concerted effort to appeal to populists, but they themselves are often not from that background. So we may see wealthy, highly educated folks representing populists, hence the term populist aligned. Highly value individual efforts. There is a resentment among these elected officials toward people who are not perceived to rightfully earn their benefits. This group believes that society doesn't need to make things fair for everyone. Their values are loyalty to America, diligence, and freedom. So those are the four archetypes, but of course, even with this more detailed look at archetypes within conservative decision makers, we can't fit anyone neatly into any box. So the guide also includes insights that hold true across all the archetypes, including the strength of freedom as an overarching value, the very strong sentiment that people have individual responsibility to take care of themselves and their families, and the fact that conservatives told us they often feel judged and villainized by progressive advocates. And you can imagine going into a conversation feeling that way doesn't set anybody up for a very open conversation. The guide also gives you what we call dials. And these are ways to get more specific even within each archetype. So you can think of these as ways to tune up or tune down characteristics within an archetype based on the decision maker's age, where they live, their life experiences, are they a parent themselves, for example, and other factors. And the guide will give you way more detail on that. One thing I want to name directly is that we explored in this research ways to directly name structural racism and the need to create equitable policies that have specific racial equity language baked in. That's a commitment of Voices for Healthy Kids and the American Heart Association, and I know something all of you watching this value. It may not surprise you to hear that in some of these interviews with some decision makers, it can be counterproductive to start there. There's a lot of polling. One of the polls we looked at is a Yahoo News and U.gov poll from last summer, where just 27% of Republicans agreed that racism is embedded in legal systems and policies. I want to acknowledge that that might not come as a surprise to you. That might make it harder for you to come at this work in a non-judging and non-polarizing way. I want you to know that our team and the Voices for Healthy Kids team is not letting up on this work. And I want you to know that saying this to you feels really uncomfortable for me, and I know it causes harm for many of you. Building understanding and changing culture here is a longer-term effort. The only way we can do that is through incremental change, open listening, and trust building. For those of you who are in settings where it's possible to advance more direct conversation, Voices for Healthy Kids has a racial equity and public policy guide that gives you way more direct resources. And your Voices team is happy to talk to you, coach you, adapt the materials that we're offering in response to that. I'm now getting into values and feelings and needs and the places where some of those conflict in our daily work. And so this is a great pivot point to the other essential component of this guide, which Anasuya will take us through.
Thanks, Jennifer. As Allison mentioned earlier, this project is different from many other message guides because it incorporates a non-polarizing approach to finding common ground during challenging conversations, while also taking care of yourself and your team members. A really effective way to find common ground, even when two people seem to be worlds apart, is to connect on the level of our common humanity. This means rather than focus on our opposing strategies, we focus on hearing and identifying feelings, needs, and core values that the other person is expressing. This new way of listening allows us to understand the underlying motivators and not get stuck on specific strategies right away. There may be a part of you that wants to find common ground and a part of you that feels frustrated or angry because you feel that you're not free to bring up the issues you're passionate about, such as direct facts about structural racism. Non-polarizing means rather than falling into a them and us scenario, we speak and listen from a place of curiosity because we want to understand where we can make a bridge between our core values and those of another person whose stance seems very different from ours. And it means staying connected to our own feelings, needs, and core values throughout the process. This guide outlines several ways you can practice staying open and curious and find common ground without surrendering what you hold most dear. The guide and training address three interconnected channels of this work. The content, research, and strategy are what we might call the head or thinking channel. Feelings and relationships are what we might call the heart or feeling channel. And the bigger compassion that holds it all, compassion for ourselves, for others, and for the overall vision of healthy children and families. We might call this the gut or intuition channel. And then thinking, feeling, and sensing, when brought together, bring deep understanding for navigating every type of situation. We're wired to use these three different types of perception all together. And when we do, our inner compass gets activated and keeps us aligned with our values and purpose. When we don't activate our inner compass by checking in with feelings, needs, and values, we can feel stuck and get hopeless or depressed. The online guide and full training offer simple methods for regaining clarity and composure, using non-polarizing language to build bridges and self-care, so you can stay fully present and be at your best. The guide gives you a 4-step process you can use alone or with your team. 1, learn to replace blaming language with feeling words. 2, learn to apply that idea in conversations with decision makers. 3, practice translating statements from decision makers into feeling, need, and value statements. And 4, role play to prepare for the real conversations. The online guide gives you pointers for using your intellect, emotional intelligence, and intuition or gut feelings to build bridges and find common ground. Take a look at the needs, values, and feeling lists in the guide. Needs. There are fewer than 20 core needs that all human beings share. What we all need in order to thrive and flourish, reach our potential, and feel fulfilled. When a core need is getting met, we feel some sort of happiness or relaxation. But when a core need isn't met, we feel some form of unhappiness or unease. And values. Our values are not something we're born with. They are choices we make based on our personality, our beliefs, our cultural environment, and our life circumstances and goals. Adhering to our values keeps us in integrity with ourselves. Our values can change over time, and how we prioritize them can change in a given situation. Feelings. When needs are not met, feelings that we call uncomfortable or the bad feelings nobody likes to have are the result. And when feelings are met, we have the ones we like, the happy or good feelings. This training will teach you to stay in your body and be informed of what's going on in your own nervous system in terms of body sensations and emotions. And your nervous system and your body picks this up way before your head can make sense of things. So you actually have a really big leg up by knowing how to access this first reaction information. This is a new way of paying attention for most of us, and it takes practice. It's well worth it, because once you know how to activate your inner compass and hear someone else's underlying feeling, needs, and values, then you can take care of yourself, even in difficult situations, and stay open to how to care for the other person and care for the conversation as a whole. We can see where we do align, even if our strategies seem opposed. That builds a bridge between our common humanity. And from there, we can negotiate based on our common ground. A doorway appears in what used to look like a brick wall. So we encourage you to use the information and exercises in the guide to build your skills on your own, with your team, and with your coalition.
The final piece of the guide, taking us into the end of our training for today, and hopefully inviting you to come to the longer training and explore the guide, is a set of prenatal through 3 messages. We started with existing messages and message research. There's a lot of good work out there, so we didn't want to reinvent the wheel. We combined those messages, we explored those in our interviews with elected officials, and then we used what we learned to adapt the messages and offer specific pivots for the archetypes. So what I'm about to show you and what's in the guide are recommended messages to use with decision makers in conservative environments to talk about prenatal through 3 policies. And the guide also offers you additional pivots for those messages within each archetype. So the 5 core messages, each of which have supporting points and proof points attached to them in the guide, are that every child deserves an opportunity to get a strong start in life. Our country is at its best when we recognize that children, including babies and toddlers, are a vital resource. Parents have a responsibility to do all they can for their babies and toddlers, but families don't always have what they need to be self-sufficient. This is our chance to make a powerful commitment for the youngest generation. We have an opportunity to make policies most effective by prioritizing action where there is the greatest need. So for example, in the guide, I can find if I'm working with a church and country, somebody who fits in the church and country archetype, and I'm thinking through how might I approach that conversation. I'm doing my due diligence on the person to see what they care about, how they've voted, what they've said in the past, and I'm augmenting that with insights from the guide to get myself ready for that conversation. What I might learn in the guide is that folks in the church and country archetype probably support strong 2-parent households, which they probably define as mom and dad. And they probably think that it's important for mom to stay home in the early years. So I'm going to take a deep breath, no matter how I feel about those things. And I'm going to acknowledge that we're both in this for kids. The value that we share here is the best thing for children. And where I might meet that person and trying to reflect that I'm hearing and understanding their needs and values is by acknowledging that a strong start may start with parents staying home with their kids if they choose to, and the environment supports their ability to do so. So I have found a place to agree and talk about what the environment might need for that to happen. From listening, I might also know that their idea of their faith requires them helping others, and that they believe that churches and the community already have resources to help people. So I might acknowledge all the resources that are available in the community and in the church, and how we definitely need folks to know more about that. Once I've established common ground there, I may be able to show where some of the gaps are. I might be able to bring people from the community, even from the church, to talk about what's needed beyond what the community and church can provide. An important note about the messages that are in the guide, wrapping together everything that we've been discussing. Thinking about who carries the message, as all of you know, is just as important as what you say. So in your coalition, thinking about who's best able to connect with and relate to a particular elected official's lived experience and perspective, who will be safe psychologically, emotionally, physically in those interactions, Those are things to discuss frankly with your coalition to decide who goes where, who carries what message, and who builds what piece of your coalition. And the guide has more resources to direct you there. Joshua. Joshua, you're on mute.
Thank you for watching. Taking note from Anasuya, you're using your influence and passion to do very important work. Every moment is an opportunity to stay curious, to regain balance and clarity in a chaotic, sometimes challenging environment to advance your goals, even when the rules of the game keep changing, and to address and ease overwhelm and burnout. To go deeper and apply this work, use our webpage, voicesforhealthykids.org. Make sure that you attend the training and utilize communities of practice and technical assistance. You may want to pause for a moment and take a screenshot so that you have the links here. We're integrating this approach across more of our work, including a next phase on discussing the threats of preemption and protecting local solutions in decision-making through the archetypes in non-polarizing communication. Watch for that in early 2023. Any questions or suggestions, please contact us at voicesforhealthykids@heart.org. Thanks again.